Hello ladies and gentlemen, today we're back in War Thunder and it's time to talk about a preemptive devlog. So on the War Thunder Reddit today there was a picture and it's from a deleted devlog. This is the FCM 36 and there will be a link to the thread in the description and also a few other links to some interesting stuff that I'll talk about later on, but pretty much this is going to be a devlog which is going to come at some point, so therefore why not talk about it now, be a bit more preemptive about it, which will mean that later on I'll have more of an opportunity to cover something else. So the FCM 36 is probably going to be our reserve vehicle or a 1.3 vehicle. That's pretty much where it's going to sit in the tree, and the reasons for this we'll get into. We'll talk about its history, we'll talk about its implementation, and then we'll talk about its place in the game and maybe some other variants that we may see of it. So the FCM in the name stands for Forge and Chantier de la Méditerranée, or however you say it in French, and it was an old shipbuilder from Toulon, which is in the south of France. It had laid dozens of dreadnoughts, cruisers, destroyers, pretty much for the Mediterranean fleets that the French had. And then when, in 1935, when Hotchkiss first proposed to mass-produce an easy but cheap infantry tank, the army turned to contractors to compete for the contract, just like they did with the other vehicles that we've talked about in the past, such as the B1 Ter series, the heavy tanks. So FCM was among these contractors, and after working on the FCM-2C, which I think I'll talk about later on. Basically, if you don't know what that is, that's going to be the large premium tank that the French get at like 1.3. It has a 75mm on it. It's an absolutely huge machine, and it fits very easily with stuff like the A1E1 Independent, the T-35, and the, I believe it's the Rogo, the Japanese one, and the Nervenversazug, or however the hell you say it, the German one at 1.3. But that was delivered in 1921, so then the company decided to get more involved deeply into the B1 project, which spawned eventually the B1 Ter, but it was also there for the Char B1 BIS and other vehicles that we'll see in-game. So FCM took on the gauntlet of, instead of these larger vehicles, going for a smaller infantry tank, and their chief engineer, Boudoir, he was ordered to study modern design on tanks and taking full advantage of electro-welding and also, the work in his yard. He was able to use the technique to create some kind of mass production vehicle which was easy to make and maybe easy to maintain in his eyes. Also, it would be gas-proof, which is kind of nice, and also the fact that gas-proof makes a massive difference is because you've got to remember the threat of gas in World War II. Everybody in Britain was issued a gas mask, and this was because of the horrors of World War I, and France was in a very similar situation with how they felt about gas. Now, luckily in World War II it was never really used, but still the threat was there before World War II that we may see it again. So luckily, for the FCM-36, they were able to create a gas-proof machine just for this reason. The suspension was also well-tested at vertical coils, and this gave a reasonably smooth ride, but pretty slow speed to whatever machine. So they basically took a lot of their expertise that they had in creating ships and tried to add them into smaller machines at the time, which generally works pretty well. If you try and take something, like if somebody's good at computers, like creating and building computers, and then you ask them to maybe work on something like laptops, or maybe, and by that I mean like, tower computers, and you make them work on laptops, or maybe they work on a system which uses a lot of electronics, they're gonna know some of the basics, which is what you need to progress forward. So let's talk about the design of the FCM-36. The name was given because of an Army designation. It formed from the name of the builder and the year of acceptance into the service. So this is very similar to some of the other planes. I shouldn't say planes because this is a tank, but it's very similar to the aircraft naming system. So the VG-33, VG-36, stuff like that. Basically taking the designer and the either company or government agency which is running it, and then putting on the year where at least either a prototype or the design was decided. So the hull was designed and tested to deflect very low velocity shells and resist against high velocity ones. So not to exactly stop them, but at least be effective against them. The zigzagging side skirts that you may see in some of the design pictures, but they were at 30 to 45 degree angles, which made them equivalent to about 44 to 55 millimeters of armor thickness, so pretty thick for a machine which is going to be rank 1. There was a backside to this though, and it was the fact that the design of the upper track's side skirt tunnel, it failed to evacuate mud correctly in trials. So despite being pierced by 5 mud chutes to try and get out as much of the mud as possible, it still got stuck in the tracks a hell of a lot, which is definitely an issue, especially with tanks such as this and also the B1 series of vehicles. The hull was also narrow, but it was roomy for a 2-man tank. So this was a 2-man vehicle, and we'll talk about some of the issues with that in a little bit. There was decent room for a 2-man though, even though the hull was narrow. The engine and transmission was placed at the rear of the vehicle, and the suspension consisted of 8 road wheels per side, sprung by 8 vertical coil springs, and then the engine itself was a Berlier V4, which was economical, but also in accordance with the specifications, and because of that, the top speed was rather limited, but it was there. They wanted certain specifications, it hit them, so therefore they decided to go for it. The turret was named the APX-1, and this thing was entirely welded. It was high, angular, and also equipped with 2 side vision slits. So you'll see on the side of many of the pictures there are these weird slits on the side of them. That's for vision for the commander in the top. Now remember, the cupola idea hadn't really spawned at this point, at least for the French, so that's why those slits are required instead of having a rounded cupola at the top of it. There was also a rear hatch on the back of the turrets for the commander to use, and also he sat on it, when he feels like it, and then when they're in combat it goes up, he stands up, and he has the job, the wonderful job of a French commander to to command the tank, to gun the tank, to load the main gun, and also be a machine gunner. What great ideas from the French in the 30s. When you had, if you read any books, Tankman's a great example. If you read that, you realize that the Germans and the British kind of realized you can't have this 1-man turret because it's too much for the commander to do. But the French just said, naff that, and we'll try it anyway. Guess what? He was massively overloaded and could never do anything efficiently. The gun was the SA-18, and by the time that they decided to build this thing, it was pretty much obsolete, which, for a variety of reasons. The main reasons were that it was low velocity, it didn't penetrate a lot, and pretty much, if you're talking about an anti-tank weapon, it just wasn't there. So instead of keeping that for a long while, they wanted to replace it with a longer barrel version, the SA-38, after the first batch of these FCM-36s were going to be produced. It was seen to have good anti-tank capabilities, which is pretty much what they needed as a direct upgrade over the SA-18, but the tests that were performed to test the SA-38's effectiveness, the SA-38 was seen as a really good gun. The issue was actually putting it into the turret. They had issues with this. The turret ring was too weak, and also with a few more structural weaknesses that the machine had, this led to the cancellation of the project to fit the SA-38, so therefore it was stuck with the subpar SA-18 gun, which is the one that we'll see in game, and it's pretty much a potato launcher. And we'll go into that in a little bit. So anyway, the manufacturers included a notice to mount a new gun at a later date. So they produced them, were like, yeah, we know that it doesn't have a satisfactory gun, but we're going to build them anyway. The Berlier diesel was a sturdy and proven truck engine, so this machine had quite a lot of horsepower behind it, or at least enough, but it was slow as hell. But it was practical, it was reliable, and that is what they asked for. It had a range of around 225 kilometers, or 140 miles, and also it only used 217 liters of fuel, which at the time was very good for the machines that the French were using, making it economical, which is something that they really, really required. In the 1934, in March, there was a wooden mock-up which was presented to the army, and it was also followed by a prototype on the 2nd of April 1935. So pretty quickly after the wooden mock-up was presented, they created this prototype. It was shown to the commission of Vincennes, I'm not exactly sure how to say that, and the hull itself, actually, they really liked it. They thought it was a bit slightly over the top with their weight specifications, because you've got to remember they wanted a light infantry vehicle to try and support the infantry. They believed it to be a bit too heavy, but during the tests, which lasted until June, so pretty much the majority of the summer, the vehicle encountered a lot of mechanical issues and was sent back to the manufacturer to be fixed. Then when it was presented a second time in September 1935, the hull and turret were lightened, the suspension revised, and the new bolted engine roof fitted. So even though they made all of those changes to the machine, it was still seen to have issues. So it was sent back again to strengthen the suspension, because it was still too heavy for the suspension on it. The new trial sessions ran from December 1935 to May 1936. It was up-armoured in the meantime, which they added 10mm of applique armour, which followed a new army specification. And the prototype also caught the eye of the Commission d'Infanterie, which is basically who it was supposed to be used for anyway. So, you know, there's good signs for this machine going forward. It definitely had its issues, but there was some promise, especially with the hull. So, one of the big drawbacks of a machine like this is the cost of it. It costs per unit 450,000 French francs, and maybe you don't understand how much that is, but let's just say it's more than the Renault R35 and the Hotchkiss H35, which were its two main competitors of the time. Also, at that time, the Rhineland crisis compelled the government to require its acceptance in May 1936. So there was stuff going on, and they just decided, you know what, hell to the bell, we're gonna go with the FCM 36. The cost was definitely an issue to them, but the model was seen as more advanced, more promising than the others, and a good basis for the future development of what they saw as infantry tanks. The first batch of 100 was ordered, and it was to be delivered ASAP, but the FCM company was not prepared until December 1936 to start even setting up a manufacturing line, showing that they were behind schedule by quite a lot. Production was then further delayed by the testing of a new prototype with a more powerful engine and better tracks, but it fell short of expectations. So because of this, the FCM 36 was the last of the 3 infantry tanks which officially were accepted by the army. So it's got that under its belt at least. The first series FCM 36 was delivered on the 2nd of May 1938, and the others followed until March of 1939. On the 12th of May the same year, the army ordered a second batch of 100, followed by a third in February 1939, and an option for a fourth. In the meantime, the manufacturer revised its cost to 900,000 French francs apiece, which was twice of the actual original price. So apparently to match its actual production costs. So they pretty much undercut themselves to build these things for the army, and once the army was committed, they were like, you know what, this is the actual price. We need money right now. And as the FCM was also involved in the B1 series of vehicles, so as I talked about before, the B1 BIS, the B1 TER that we've covered before, there was an announcement which was made that no more FCM 36s would be expected for delivery until September 1940. In the meantime, there were plans to drop the heavy cast APX R turret, which was also used by the R35 and the H35, and replace it with the FCM 36 turret, which was lighter, sturdier, and easier to manufacture. The issue was it still had to solve its structural issues when firing the new SA-38 gun. So despite all of these plans, the army never bought the second batch, and only the first 100 would see service during the French campaign. So they wanted 400, they only got 100, and they only paid half price for them. I mean, if you're looking for economical terms for the army, I suppose that's not too bad on their end, but they didn't get 400 tanks that they wanted, and mainly because the company creating them had different ideas of what they wanted to work on, and also production issues over time. So let's talk about its role on the battlefield, which is generally, how you should see these things, or generally how they should be... No, that's wrong. I won't say that. Seeing them in action is not the same as what they're going to be like in War Thunder, but I still think it is a vital thing to talk about, because maybe some of the issues it runs into in real life can also be seen in War Thunder, and therefore you can work around them. That's basically the point I'm making when I look at the action reports of these machines. So the first model of the FCM 36, despite the fact that it had a really nice hull, it was still armed with the low-velocity SA-18. It carried only 12 HE shells, and driving the French tank crews to despair when they were pretty much committed en masse against the German panzer divisions, which were never intended to match against these vehicles. So pretty much what happened to the British in North Africa in the early times, where they were just completely outmatched by the Panzer IIIs and IVs that they faced in their Vickers and A13s, stuff like that. The 100 units were spread between two Battalion de Chars Légers, or the BCL, the 4th and the 7th, which each had 45 FCMs. The others were kept for training and testing purposes. On the 25th of August 1939, during mobilization, the two units were dissolved and integrated into the 503E, or 1st, and the 505E, or 1st, RCC, the Régiment des Chars de Combat. Later combined with the 3rd BCC, which were equipped also with H-35s, into the 503rd GBC, the Groupement de Bataillon de Chars, and the Armoured Reserve of the 3rd Army. So they started out, far apart, and then they just lumped them all together to, push towards the enemy. On the 13th of May 1940, news came that the Germans had secured a bridgehead on the western bank of the Meuse River near Sedan, and the 7th BCC was ordered to counterattack with the support of an infantry regiment. On the following morning, they clashed with light advanced elements of the, 109th, I believe? 109th Army Corps of Heinz Guderian, and they managed to destroy these light vehicles, and then they collided with the main advance, and were found fighting Panzer IIIs. So you can see the issue with a bit of a matchup here. So some of the latter were still equipped with the feeble 37mm, and they failed to penetrate the armor of the FCM, so at least they had that going for them. And then at the same time, the weak SA-18 was completely inadequate even against their 30mm of armor. So you pretty much had two tanks which can't penetrate each other, shooting potatoes at each other, hoping that eventually one of them actually pens. And, well, it didn't go too well. So both sides engaged at point-blank range. They maneuvered about and were searching for weak spots, and as usual, the German tactical advantages began to tell, and by dealing with each tank individually, they managed to knock out most of the French vehicles, and at the same time, the 4th BCC was kept in reserve and was found defending Ston on the 15th of May. The remnants of the two units were retired and replenished, and then thrown in action on the 9th of 10th of June against German positions on the Eisner, I'm guessing is how you say it, river, with some success, but they lost most of their remaining tanks while covering the retreat. So after the fall of France, the Germans captured 37 of these FCMs in various conditions, and they were overhauled, repaired, and stockpiled for other uses, just like a lot of the French tanks were. I mean, you might as well take the spoils of war and make use of them. And some of the uses are kind of interesting, and we may actually see them in game, and they may be kind of worrying for some German premiums down the line. We're talking about this chassis with just big guns on it. So in 1943, they needed a new Marder platform. The ones that they created, they believed were inadequate. So under the designation of the Panzerkampfwagen 737 FCMF, 10 of these vehicles were rebuilt with a new casemate, and they housed a 75mm Pak 40 on it. These were employed by the 21st Panzer Division in the Battle of Normandy summer 1944. So these actually saw service, making it a perfect premium for the Germans to get. 12 others were also rebuilt with the 105mm LEFH 16x18 SF Auf Geschutzwagen FCMF. The only surviving FCM-36 is now displayed at the Saumur Museum in full running condition. So, the 105 howitzer version we could definitely see in game, the 75mm version we can definitely see in game, and pretty much they are the hull of an FCM-36 with a 75 mounted centrally with a blast shield around it. So that's pretty much how it is. But what we're going to do is we're going to look at mainly the gun that you find on this machine, because this is what's going to limit its combat effectiveness in War Thunder. So it had a 37mm, the SA-18 Puto, or Putio, I'm not exactly sure how you say that, but there was a comment on the War Thunder Reddit by Yinks Gepards, and it pretty much says that the penetration on these rounds are just not good enough. So the APHE that I had, the 92 MLE, at 0 degrees angle it could pen 12mm at 100 meters. So that's going to be useless. That might not even make it into game. The APC-35, when tested by the French at 35 degree angle, could pen 20mm at 400 meters. So not great, but you know, you could still pen some tanks in War Thunder. When the Germans tested it at 30 degrees angle at 100 meters, 25mm could be penned with the APC-35 and 19mm at 500. So what we're looking at here is a very, 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 very weak gun. And so we have a platform which is a very weak gun, but quite a strong hull of about 40mm angled. So generally what has happened is Gaijin balanced by armor instead of gun. So this thing could be 1.7 and 2.0 and it would be absolutely useless. But at 1.0 and 1.3 it could still penetrate some vehicles and its armor could be effective. And remember, it's only got a 2-man crew, so knocking it out wouldn't be that hard to do. You just need the right gun and the right time. Hopefully this thing gets a BR of 1.0 or 1.3 so it is combat effective. I really hope that is the case. But generally what we see with these machines is they are balanced by their armor, so its gun will be useless. Maybe we get another version in the game with the SA-38 gun on it, Obviously, you would have to have a lot of recoil and maybe have a chance of blowing up your turret, or maybe your turret falling off, but you could add that in and that could be a good 1720 vehicle, I think. I think that could fit in really well. But anyway, this has been a preliminary look at the FCM 36. Give us your thoughts in the comments, and also hope you have a wonderful day.